The garage smelled the same as it always had: motor oil, pine resin, and something faintly floral that I could never quite explain until my daughter pointed out years ago that Eleanor used to store her gardening gloves on the second shelf. That scent had outlasted her by 2 years now. I don't move the gloves. I wasn't looking for anything that afternoon. October in Kelowna had turned sharp and gray, the kind of cold that comes off the lake and settles into your knees before you even realize you've been standing still too long. I was just clearing out boxes, the way I'd been meaning to do since the summer. Eleanor had always been the organized one. After she passed, I let things pile up. You do, when the person who kept your life in order is suddenly gone. The box was tucked behind her old seedling trays, plain cardboard, sealed with a strip of tape that had gone brittle and yellow. My name was written on the top in her handwriting. Just Arthur. That's all. No date, no explanation. I stood there looking at it for a long time before I picked it up. Eleanor died 22 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and merciless, the way that particular disease tends to be. She was diagnosed in February and gone by June. We had 41 years together, raised 2 kids in this house, watched the birch trees in the backyard grow taller than the roofline. She knew every creak in these floors. I still hear her sometimes, in the mornings, when the house makes its usual sounds, and for just a second, my brain hasn't caught up yet to the fact that it's only me. I brought the box inside and set it on the kitchen table. I made tea first. Old habit, hers actually. She always said you should sit down properly before opening anything important. I don't even particularly like tea. I made it anyway. Inside the box was a USB drive, a sealed envelope, and a handwritten note on top that said, "Open the envelope first. Watch the drive second. Don't tell Philip until you've done both. Philip is our son." I should tell you about Philip. He's 43, lives out in Langley with his wife and their 2 kids. He works in commercial real estate, does well for himself, always has. Growing up, he was the sharp one, the one who always knew the angle, always knew what something was worth. Eleanor used to joke that he came out of the womb asking about the resale value. I always thought she was being hard on him. She loved him. I know she did. But Eleanor saw things in people that I was too slow to notice. Our daughter, Simone, is 38. She lives 20 minutes from us, works as a school librarian, calls me every other day to check in. She brought me soup for the first 3 months after Eleanor died, and never once made me feel like a burden for accepting it. She's the quiet one, always was. I opened the envelope. Eleanor's handwriting filled 4 pages, front and back, the letters smaller and more careful than her usual style. She must have written it when her hands were already starting to weaken. I could tell by the pressure, lighter in some places, almost faint, like she was conserving something. She started by telling me she loved me. She said she was sorry for what she was about to tell me, not because it wasn't true, but because she knew I wasn't going to want to believe it. She said that in 41 years of marriage she had learned exactly one hard thing about me. I always believed the best about the people I loved, even when the evidence was sitting right in front of me. She said she meant that as a compliment mostly, but that in this particular case it was going to be a problem. Then she told me about Philip. Over the past several years, she had written down specific dates, going back almost 5 years. Philip had been quietly positioning himself around our finances. It started with small things, offering to help us consolidate investments, suggesting we move accounts to a financial advisor he recommended, a colleague of his. Eleanor had gone along with some of it, not wanting to create conflict, but she'd kept notes. Careful, dated notes. Bank statements she'd printed and filed. Emails she'd forwarded to a folder. A conversation she'd recorded on her phone when Philip didn't know she was listening, in which he talked to someone about the timeline for what he called the transition of the estate. She had not confronted him. She told me she'd thought about it, but she was sick by then, and she knew that a confrontation would only make him careful, make him harder to catch. So instead, she built a file. Everything went into that box, and she left it for me. "You'll want to give him the benefit of the doubt," she wrote. "You always do. I'm asking you not to this time. Look at the documents, listen to the recording, then make your own decision. Whatever you decide, I trust you. But I wanted you to know. You deserve to know." I sat with that letter for a long time. The tea went cold. Outside, the birch trees were dropping their last leaves, and the light was going the way it does in October, turning amber and then just gone. I put in the USB drive. There were 3 folders. One was labeled Bank Documents. One was labeled Emails. The third was labeled Recording Deck 14, with a year from 2 years before she died. I went through the bank documents first. They were statements from the joint investment account Eleanor and I had held through a firm downtown, accounts we'd been building since our 40s, retirement savings, the house equity line. There were transfers I didn't remember authorizing. Not large ones, nothing so obvious that it would have flagged immediately, but consistent. A few $100s here, a small reallocation there. The pattern only became visible when you laid the statements out in sequence, the way Eleanor had, with handwritten annotations in the margins. The emails were between Phillip and the financial advisor. I recognized the advisor's name. We'd met him twice at Philip's recommendation. A pleasant enough man, very polished, lots of framed certificates on the wall. The emails were professional on the surface, but Eleanor had highlighted specific phrases and written questions beside them. Things like, "once the primary holder is no longer involved," and "simplified transfer upon settlement of the estate." Read in isolation, they sounded like routine financial planning language. Read in the sequence Eleanor had arranged them. They told a different story. Then I listened to the recording. It was 14 minutes long. The audio quality wasn't perfect. Eleanor had clearly just left her phone on the counter and walked into the other room, but it was clear enough. Philip was on the phone, standing in our kitchen, using the warm voice he uses when he's working, the one that sounds like he's doing you a favor. I recognized the cadence. I'd heard it in business conversations before, never imagined hearing it aimed at something like this. He was talking about the house. He was talking about what the lot would fetch now that Kelowna real estate had gone the way it had, how the timing would be important, how Dad's a reasonable guy, he'll go along with whatever makes sense. He mentioned Simone once, dismissively. Simone won't push back. She never does. He talked about how the financial advisor had already restructured things to make the transfer cleaner, how it was really just a matter of waiting. Waiting. For what? He didn't say explicitly. He didn't have to. I closed the laptop. I walked out to the backyard and stood by Eleanor's garden, the one she'd built over 30 years, from bare clay soil into something that actually bloomed. Everything was dormant now, cut back for winter, but the bones of it were still there. The raised beds she'd made from cedar planks, the trellis against the south fence. The small bird bath she'd bought at a garage sale in 2003 and carried home balanced on her lap in the passenger seat because it wouldn't fit in the trunk. I thought about what she would say if she were standing there beside me. I knew exactly what she would say. I called our family lawyer the next morning, a woman named Patterson who had handled our wills and the house purchase back when we'd first moved in. I'd known her for over 20 years. I asked if I could come in, and I asked her to please not mention it to anyone. I drove downtown and sat across from her desk and put the USB drive on the blotter between us. I didn't say much. Eleanor had organized everything so clearly that the documents did most of the talking. Patterson went through it methodically, the way she always does, making notes, asking a few precise questions. When she got to the recording, she listened with her headphones in and her face perfectly still. When she was done, She took off the headphones and looked at me for a moment. "Arthur," she said, "your wife was a very thorough woman." "She was," I said, "and you want to know your options." "I want to know everything," I said, "and then I want to fix it." What followed was several weeks of careful work, Patterson coordinating with a forensic accountant she trusted, documents being reviewed, accounts being examined. I won't walk through every detail because some of it is still technically sensitive, but what they found confirmed what Eleanor had laid out. The financial advisor had moved money in ways that were, at minimum, deeply irregular and, at maximum, actionable. Philip hadn't directly taken anything in a way that was straightforwardly criminal. He'd been too careful for that. But he had been positioning himself systematically to benefit substantially from my death in ways that went well beyond what Eleanor and I had ever intended or discussed. The financial advisor resigned before anything formal was filed. Patterson said that was probably the most telling signal of all. I didn't call Philip during any of this. I didn't change my behavior with him at all. I answered his calls, I talked about the hockey season, I listened to him complain about the commute to Langley. I don't know where I found the steadiness for that. Eleanor probably. She'd been steady when she needed to be. I was learning from her even after she was gone. I made an appointment with Patterson to update my will. We went through it carefully. The house, our home of 38 years, I put into a trust structured to pass to Simone, with a clause that allowed me to live there for the rest of my life and protected it from any claims that might arise from my estate outside of that intention. The investment accounts, what remained of them after the cleanup, I restructured and designated partly to Simone and partly to a bursary fund I set up in Eleanor's name through the local library system. She'd volunteered there for 12 years, and it felt right. There's a scholarship now for kids in the Okanagan who want to study environmental science. Eleanor would have liked that. Philip's share of the estate, in the revised will, is $10,000. It's not nothing, but it's not what he'd been planning for. Patterson asked me if I wanted to document my reasons in the will, which you're allowed to do in British Columbia. I thought about it. In the end, I said no. I didn't want it to become a legal argument after I was gone, and I didn't want Simone to have to live in the middle of that. The will says what it says. Philip will have to come to his own conclusions about why. I told Simone everything. I drove to her place on a Saturday morning and we sat in her kitchen while her husband took the kids out for a few hours. I brought the letter Eleanor had written. I thought she deserved to read her mother's words directly, not filtered through my summary of them. She cried, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, the way Simone does everything. When she was done, she folded the letter very carefully and slid it back into the envelope and held it in both hands. "Mum knew," she said. "She knew," I agreed. "For how long?" "Long enough to do something about it." Simone looked out her kitchen window for a while. Then she said, "She was protecting you. Even from the end, she was still protecting you." I didn't say anything because I didn't trust myself to. We had lunch together, the four of us, when her husband and the kids got back, and her youngest climbed on my lap and fell asleep there the way small children do, suddenly and completely, and I sat very still so as not to wake her and thought about Eleanor in that garden. In that car, with the bird bath on her lap, at the kitchen table writing 4 pages in careful small handwriting because she wanted me to know. I haven't spoken to Philip about any of this. I don't know if I will. Some people assume I must be furious, that I must want a confrontation, a reckoning, some kind of moment where everything is said aloud. Maybe I did, at first. But the longer I sit with it, the less I feel that need. Philip made his choices a long time ago, and he'll live with whatever comes from that. I made mine. I did what Eleanor asked me to do. There is a version of this story, I know, where I question everything, where I wonder if I misread something, if Eleanor misread something, if Eleanor misread something. I went through that version in the first few nights, lying awake, listening to the house. But Eleanor was not a woman who misread things. She was precise and patient, and she did not put 4 pages of documentation together and hide it in a sealed box without being certain of what she was doing. I owe her the respect of believing her. The garden is resting now, the way gardens do in winter. But I've been out there most weekends, reading up on what she planted, learning the names of things I only knew as Eleanor's flowers. There's a climbing rose on the south trellis that's apparently quite old. She grafted it from a cutting she got from her mother, who got it from her mother. 3 generations of women in Eleanor's family tended that plant before it came to this yard. I learned how to prune it properly. I've been learning a lot of things. Last week I was raking the last of the leaves from around the raised beds, and I found one of her garden markers, those little wooden stakes she used to write on with a paint pen. This one just said, "Sweet peas, try again in spring." Her handwriting, faded but still there. I brought it inside. It's on the windowsill above the kitchen sink now, where I can see it while I do the dishes. Try again in spring. I think about that a lot. The lake is going quiet now the way it does before the real freeze, and the light comes in low through the birch trees, and the house is my own. And I am more certain than I have been in 2 years that I am living exactly the life Eleanor meant for me to have. Not unchanged, not unbroken, but mine. That's enough. For now that is more than enough. I keep thinking about that garden marker on my windowsill. Sweet peas, try again in spring. Eleanor wrote that, probably in an ordinary moment, kneeling in the dirt with her paint pen, thinking nothing of it. She had no idea it would be the last thing she ever said to me. That's the thing about the choices we make quietly, over years. They accumulate into something larger than we intended. Eleanor chose, every single day, to be the kind of person who paid attention, who kept notes, who loved carefully and precisely, instead of carelessly and loud. And Phillip chose, over those same years, to look at the people who loved him and calculate what they were worth. Neither of them announced those choices. They just made them again and again until the weight of them became impossible to ignore. I don't think people are born one way or the other. I really don't. But I do think that integrity, the kind Eleanor had, the kind that held even when she was sick and frightened and running out of time, isn't something that shows up in a crisis. It builds slowly. It's in the small decisions, whether you tell the truth when a lie would be easier, whether you do right by someone even when no one is watching, whether you think about what you owe the people who trust you. Eleanor spent a lifetime making those small decisions in one direction. That's why, when it mattered most, she knew exactly what to do. What's harder for me to sit with is my own part in this. Eleanor told me gently in that letter that I always believed the best about the people I loved, even when the evidence was right in front of me. She meant it kindly. But I've been honest with myself about what that actually cost us. There's a difference between generosity and willful blindness, and I had been confusing the two for years. Seeing clearly, really looking at the people around you without flinching, that takes something. It's uncomfortable. It requires you to hold 2 things at once: love for someone and an honest assessment of who they are. I wasn't doing that. Eleanor was doing it for both of us. What she left me in that box wasn't just evidence. It was a lesson in how to see. And then there's the question of what you do once you see. That's where I surprised myself, honestly. I expected to fall apart. I expected rage or grief or some combination of the two that would make me useless for weeks. Instead, I found something steadier. I made the calls I needed to make. I sat with Patterson and went through the documents and made my decisions one at a time. I don't take credit for that. I think Eleanor's steadiness was still in the house somehow, still in the walls and the floorboards, and I borrowed it. But I also think that when you finally stop avoiding a hard thing, you discover that you are more capable than you believed. The fear of looking is almost always worse than the looking itself. Philip counted on my reluctance to look. He was wrong. Simone asked me once, a few weeks after everything settled, if I was okay. I told her I was getting there. She said, "Mum would be proud of you." I didn't answer right away. I looked out at the garden, the dormant beds, the bare trellis, the bird bath in the November light. I think Eleanor would be proud of what she built. Not the evidence file, not the legal outcome, but the fact that after 41 years together, she still knew me well enough to reach me from the other side of everything. That kind of love doesn't happen by accident. It's built carefully out of years of showing up honestly for another person. That's what I want to carry forward. Not the anger, not the loss. Those will do their own work in their own time. But the lesson she left me, that the people who deserve your trust will earn it slowly through small honest acts over years, and that it is never too late to see clearly. It is never too late to do right. Try again in spring. I intend to.